The sound was sharp, sudden, and humiliating. On the courthouse steps, in front of lawyers, clerks, and everyday citizens, a uniformed officer raised his hand and struck a black woman across the face. The crowd froze. The officer's voice boomed, painting her as dangerous, unruly, and unworthy. But what no one realized, what not even the officer himself could imagine, was that within the hour, that same woman would walk back into the courtroom, take the bench in full robes, and reveal the truth with every camera and every number on her side. Because sometimes, power without truth forgets it can also be judged. If you believe dignity should never be optional, tap like to help this message travel further. The autumn air outside the courthouse felt heavy with expectation. Reporters clustered at the edge of the steps, waiting for the usual routine. Hearings, arraignments, motions that filled the calendar. What none of them expected was the spectacle about to unfold. Officer Grant Mercer, broad-shouldered in his Navy uniform, loomed at the bottom of the steps. His jaw was tight, eyes sharp with suspicion that had long since turned into habit. He didn't see Kendra Lawson as a woman on her way to do her work. He saw only a target, a disruption, an excuse to assert power. "Kneel down, now!" His voice cut across the chatter. Gasps rose from the passers-by. Some stepped back, uncertain whether to intervene. Kendra stood tall. Her posture was calm, her face resolute, even as Mercer's hand shot out and grabbed her arm. She had done nothing, no raised voice, no threat, but the officer's performance was already underway. The slap landed with the cruelty of a whip crack. Her head snapped to the side, the sting blazing across her cheek. The crowd recoiled. Mercer shoved her against the stone wall of the courthouse, pressing his forearm into her shoulder as he pulled handcuffs from his belt. "Resisting arrest!" he barked, loud enough for the microphones nearby to catch. Kendra did not resist. She breathed slowly, her voice low and steady. "You are making a mistake, officer, and it will not hold." But Mercer only tightened the cuffs until the metal bit her wrists. The crowd began to murmur. A few onlookers raised their phones, filming shakily. Others whispered the familiar lines. She must have done something. The officer wouldn't act without reason. Mercer turned to those whispers, feeding them. She tried to force her way in. Aggressive, refused security instructions. Possible impersonation. His words rolled with practiced ease, a narrative designed to stick. Two more officers, Caleb Horn and Daniel Ricks, appeared from the doorway. Mercer's voice hardened. "You saw what happened. Back me up." And they did. Without hesitation, they nodded, muttering about a malfunctioning body camera, about false documents. A chorus of lies forming in real time. The woman in cuffs, Kendra Lawson, kept her head high. She did not argue, did not plead. She knew what truth required: patience, preservation, and the right moment. Mercer yanked her toward the courthouse doors, his grip iron, the cuffs cut deeper with each step. To the gallery outside, it looked like order had been restored, like a threat had been contained. That was the story Mercer wanted. That was the performance beginning its act. But beneath the sting on her cheek and the burning of her wrists, Kendra carried something Mercer could not see, something heavier than handcuffs and stronger than his badge. Her silence was not weakness, it was preparation. Inside the courthouse lobby, the marble echoed with footsteps and hushed voices. Spectators followed at a distance, curious to see what would happen next. Mercer's voice carried over them, retelling his version of events before any judge had even entered the room. She came out of nowhere, tried to push past me. Aggressive, unstable, Caleb added quickly. Her ID looked fake. Daniel nodded, and her tone, completely out of control. The narrative grew louder than the truth itself, filling the space with authority's echo. Kendra said nothing. She walked, wrists bound, her gaze steady on the great seal of the court carved above the entrance. She knew where she was heading. She knew the seat that awaited her, though no one else in the building did. The courtroom doors opened. The crowd poured in. Officers delivered her like a trophy to the front. Onlookers whispered again, that same dangerous murmur. If she's innocent, why is she in cuffs? And yet, beneath the murmurs, a different current stirred. A quiet unease. A sense that the performance might not match reality. That the story being told was too quick, too polished, too rehearsed. Kendra Lawson did not need to prove it yet. That moment would come. For now she endured the humiliation, the cuffs, and the glares, letting them believe she was cornered. Because in just a little while, when the recess ended and the courtroom rose, the entire story would turn. And the same voices that mocked her would have no choice but to fall silent. The heavy doors of the courtroom closed with a low thud, sealing the murmurs of the hallway outside. The room itself seemed to breathe, a living chamber of polished wood, worn benches, and the solemn seal of justice above the bench. It was a place meant for truth, but on this morning, it would echo first with lies. Officer Grant Mercer marched Kendra Lawson to the front as though parading a captured enemy. The cuffs on her wrists clinked with each step, metallic reminders of the humiliation she carried. The gallery, rows of citizens and court staff, leaned forward with curiosity sharpened into judgment. Resisting arrest, potential impersonation, attempted breach of security. Mercer's voice carried before any question was asked. He didn't simply report, he performed. His words were scripted with confidence, spoken as if the court itself depended on his version. Behind him, officers Caleb Horn and Daniel Ricks moved into place, silent shadows ready to echo. Mercer gestured toward them with the ease of a conductor cueing his chorus. They saw her push through, didn't you? Caleb nodded immediately. Yes, sir. She was forceful, refused instruction. Daniel followed without hesitation. Raised her voice too. Aggressive tone. We had no choice but to intervene. The words fell into the air like bricks, each one building a wall between Kendra and the truth. Kendra's voice had not been raised. Her steps had not been rushed. Her documents had not been false. But in the courtroom, perception hardens quickly, especially when spoken by men in uniform. The gallery murmured again, their whispers filling the wooden chamber like a low tide. If 3 officers say it, it must be true. The judge presiding temporarily, a gray-haired man filling the bench until the day's docket shifted, listened with brows knitted, but eyes cautious. Authority leaned heavily toward those in blue. Mercer pressed further, raising his chin, speaking with conviction. We attempted to activate body cam footage, but unfortunately, a malfunction occurred. Equipment failure. The phrase hung in the air. Several heads in the gallery nodded, as if that were a reasonable explanation, as if coincidence and malfunction always came to protect men like him. Kendra lifted her wrists slightly, the cuffs glinting under the light. Her voice was low but carried with a clarity that made people pause. You claim malfunction, but malfunctions leave traces. Systems back up. Servers record. If your cameras are honest, the truth remains. Mercer sneered. Listen to her, talking like a lawyer. She had documents, Daniel added quickly, but they looked wrong. Could be fake credentials. Could be fraud. The judge tapped his gavel lightly. Order. The accused will remain silent unless addressed. Kendra inclined her head, but said nothing further. Her silence wasn't surrender. It was calculation. The chorus of lies thickened. Mercer described her as disruptive. Daniel painted her as deceptive. Caleb insisted she resisted commands. Piece by piece, they layered the portrait of a woman dangerous, dishonest, and undeserving. The gallery leaned in closer. Some clutched their coats. Others whispered with lips, half hidden behind hands. The effect was the same: isolation. Kendra stood at the center of the room, wrists bound, surrounded by a circle of suspicion drawn not by evidence but by voices. Yet even as the walls of lies closed in, her eyes did not falter. She studied the bench, the seal, the carved wood panels behind the judge. Symbols of law meant to protect, now temporarily serving as backdrop to her humiliation. The presiding judge cleared his throat. Officers Mercer, Horn, Ricks, your statements will be entered into record. For now, the accused remains in custody. The matter will be reviewed once documentation is produced. Mercer's smirk flickered, satisfied. He believed the performance had been convincing enough to carry the day. Kendra inhaled slowly. The cuffs still dug into her skin, but her voice returned, calm and unwavering. Your Honor, I request one thing: that all surveillance from this courthouse, every hallway, every camera, every device, be preserved in full. Do not allow it to vanish. Mercer barked a laugh, sharp and dismissive. Preserved? She thinks she has a say. She's a fraud, pretending to know the law. But there was something in the way she spoke, something measured, professional, undeniable, that made a few heads in the gallery tilt in curiosity. The presiding judge frowned but made a note. The request is unusual, but I will mark it for consideration. Caleb stepped forward, his voice rough with scorn. She's playing a part, Your Honor. Talking like she belongs here. Talking like she knows procedure. Kendra turned her gaze on him, calm as still water. I know more than you think, and when this record is complete, the truth will stand taller than your lies. The gallery grew quiet. Something in her composure unnerved even those who had judged her harshly moments before. For the first time, Mercer's eyes flickered with doubt, though he masked it quickly with another scornful smirk. The judge announced a short recess, his gavel falling with a dull crack. 10 minutes. Officers, keep her in custody until further order. As the room emptied into whispers and shuffled footsteps, Mercer leaned close to Kendra, his breath heavy with arrogance. You won't walk out of here with anything but shame. That's the only verdict waiting for you. Kendra met his stare, unblinking. Then prepare yourself, because the next verdict will not be mine. It will be yours. He scoffed, pulling her toward the holding bench as the gallery continued buzzing. To the casual eye, it looked like victory for Mercer. 3 officers in agreement, 1 woman in cuffs. The imbalance of power seemed absolute. But power that relies on lies stands on fragile ground, and the weight of truth was waiting, just beyond the recess. The courtroom's energy had shifted during the recess. Conversations buzzed in corners. People speculated in hushed tones, and the officers stood taller as though already vindicated. To them, it was simple. 3 voices united would outweigh 1 woman in cuffs. That was how it usually worked. When the gavel struck and the room settled again, Officer Grant Mercer rose to his full height, chest puffed with self-assurance. He launched into a longer account, weaving a narrative as carefully as a craftsman spinning rope, each strand a lie, each knot a snare designed to hold fast. She was combative from the very start, Mercer declared, his voice resonant. Refused to follow direct orders, attempted to bypass security, and resisted lawful arrest. We acted with restraint, given the threat. Caleb Horn leaned forward, nodding emphatically. That's right. She pushed against Officer Mercer, tried to slip past us. Her demeanor was hostile. We had to protect the integrity of the courthouse. Daniel Ricks added his layer, tone flat but forceful. And the documents she carried, they didn't add up, looked suspicious. We couldn't verify them. Could be impersonation of a government officer. Each statement built on the other, a wall of words stacking higher and higher until it seemed unscalable. The gallery leaned in, lips pursed, eyes darting between the officers and the restrained woman beside them. Kendra Lawson listened in silence. Her wrists ached from the cuffs, but her eyes remained steady. She did not interrupt, though the lies curled in the air like smoke. She knew what smoke always promised. Eventually, a fire would reveal itself. Mercer pressed on. The situation escalated quickly, Your Honor. When we attempted to escort her for questioning, she pulled back violently. We had no choice but to apply force. If anything, we exercised patience beyond protocol. The judge, still the temporary one, shifted uneasily in his seat. The words sounded convincing, smooth, professional. They carried the weight of uniforms, the authority of badges. And yet, somewhere in the tone lingered the edge of rehearsal, as though the performance had been polished in the short recess. The gallery murmured again. Some shook their heads disapprovingly at Kendra. Others whispered doubts, but quietly, fearful of challenging the majority view. It was easier to accept the officer's version than to imagine their hands could be stained with violence and prejudice. Kendra's voice broke the rhythm at last. Calm, even. 3 officers with one story, yet none of you can present evidence to support it. Only words. Only performance. Mercer snapped back quickly, eager to maintain control. Her aggression was evidence enough. The court saw her brought in screaming. But the gallery remembered she had not screamed. She had walked in silent, her gaze fixed ahead. Some faces in the benches softened, uncertain now. Still, Caleb rushed to fill the gap. Not screaming, no, but her eyes, wild, her posture, threatening. We could see intent. Daniel nodded, eager to reinforce. Body language says more than words sometimes. She was a danger. We did what duty required. It was an old trick, shaping perceptions with vague impressions. Nothing tangible, just feelings rephrased as fact. In a courtroom, those blurred lines could sway even the most skeptical listener. Kendra lifted her chin. Duty without truth is not service. It is theater, and every performance ends. The presiding judge rapped the gavel gently. Enough. Officers, your statements are noted. The accused will remain silent until called. Mercer smirked, satisfied with the judge's rebuke. To him, every moment was momentum, every note in the record another nail in her credibility. But beneath his confidence, a crack had begun to show. When Kendra spoke, it wasn't with panic or pleading. It was measured, deliberate. As though she knew the stage was temporary, as though she could already see the curtain rising on another act. The gallery sensed it too. Some leaned back, puzzled by her composure. She did not tremble. She did not cry. She stood as though her wrists were bound in ceremony, not shame. Mercer tried one more push, painting her with broader strokes. We suspect she came here to disrupt proceedings, maybe even to infiltrate official ranks. Why else would she arrive so defiant, so uncooperative? Kendra's reply was quiet, but it cut through the noise like clear water through dust. Why else? Perhaps because truth does not bow to intimidation. Perhaps because some doors must be walked through, no matter who tries to block them. Her words lingered in the room, stirring unease. For the first time, a hush replaced the gallery's murmurs. Even the judge looked down at his notes, hesitant. The balance had not shifted yet, not fully. The officers still stood in numbers. Their story still dominated the record. But the calm strength in Kendra's voice planted a seed, and seeds, though invisible at first, always grow. Mercer clenched his jaw, sensing the subtle change. He glanced at Caleb and Daniel, their faces a little too tight, their nods a little too eager. The chorus of lies was holding, but only barely. Kendra closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. The humiliation was real. The sting on her cheek, the ache in her wrists, the suspicion pressing in from all sides. Yet she carried it differently than most. Where others might break, she chose stillness. Where others might rage, she chose patience. Because she knew, lies can flood a room, but truth only needs one open door to pour in, and soon, that door would open. The courtroom smelled faintly of varnished wood and old paper, a mixture of tradition and authority. Yet, instead of dignity, the air now carried the tension of accusation. 3 officers stood shoulder to shoulder, forming a wall of uniforms at the front of the room. Their presence was meant to reassure the gallery, but today it became a stage for embellishment. Officer Grant Mercer paced deliberately, his polished shoes striking the floor in heavy rhythm. He lifted his hand as though holding invisible evidence, painting pictures with words. She carried identification, yes, but it was clearly counterfeit. Wrong seals, wrong signatures. She tried to bluff her way inside, likely planning to interfere with proceedings. Gasps rose from the benches. Words like counterfeit and interfere carried poisonous weight, spreading quickly from ear to ear. Caleb Horn stepped in, his voice sharp. When I approached, she grew hostile. Her eyes were fixed, her posture confrontational. I've seen it before. People who come to cause trouble. Daniel Ricks added his piece smoothly. And when Officer Mercer restrained her, she twisted her wrists, as though resisting. It's a tactic. Make it look like you're the victim when you're the aggressor. Each voice stacked onto the last. Mercer, Caleb, and Daniel weren't simply testifying, they were choreographing. Each accusation expanded the script, thickening the illusion until the gallery began to nod. To the casual listener, it sounded like harmony, 3 witnesses aligned. Kendra Lawson stood silent, wrists bound, her face calm but unreadable. She let their voices echo, let the gallery draw its own temporary conclusions. She had no need to interrupt yet. For now, the officers dug their own trenches. The presiding judge glanced at the woman in cuffs. His brows furrowed slightly, but the pull of uniformed testimony weighed heavy. He scribbled notes, as though trying to follow the chorus without questioning the melody. Mercer pressed further, his tone rising. Your Honor, I suspect impersonation. No ordinary citizen arrives with forged credentials. This is fraud, plain and simple. The word fraud snapped through the room like a whip. The gallery stirred again. Whispers hissed. A criminal, a trickster. She doesn't belong here. Kendra lifted her gaze slowly, meeting the murmurs with steady eyes. Words alone cannot make truth. Fraud requires proof. Where's yours? Her voice was calm, deliberate, but Mercer seized on it. Hear that? She admits it. She knows procedure. Ordinary people don't talk like that. She's rehearsed, playing a role. Caleb chimed in quickly. Exactly. That tone, that confidence, it's performance. A real citizen would be afraid, apologetic. She's acting. Daniel finished the trio with a shake of his head. Dangerous, Your Honor. Clever criminals always sound calm. The gallery seemed persuaded. A murmur of agreement spread like ripples on water. One woman clutched her handbag tighter, as if the restrained figure before them could still steal from her. Another leaned closer to a neighbor, whispering, "She looks too sure of herself, probably guilty." The irony was bitter. Her composure, her dignity, her refusal to be broken, those were twisted into weapons against her. The judge cleared his throat. Officers, your statements will remain on record. The accused will remain in custody until documents are verified. Mercer straightened, satisfied. It felt like momentum, another brick in his carefully built wall. He believed the gallery now saw what he wanted them to see. Not a woman of strength, but a figure of suspicion. Kendra lowered her eyes briefly, letting the silence around her thicken. Then she spoke softly, every word steady. You accuse me of falsifying what is real. You accuse me of aggression when I stood still. And you call calmness a trick. Tell me, if silence, stillness, and dignity are threats, what does that say about the ones who fear them? The gallery hushed, the words cutting through the air. For a moment, uncertainty wavered across faces. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others frowned at Mercer, as if to question whether the story had grown too neat, too polished. Mercer clenched his jaw, his knuckles whitening at the podium. He leaned closer to the judge, lowering his voice but making sure the gallery still heard. Your Honor, I advise caution. She's manipulative. Every word is designed to twist perception. If she walks free, the entire courtroom could be compromised. It was a clever tactic. Frame her intelligence as deceit, her composure as manipulation. But the seed of doubt had been planted. The gallery wasn't nodding quite as eagerly now. The judge glanced from the officers to the woman in cuffs, then back to his notes. Kendra's wrists throbbed from the pressure of the cuffs. The sting on her cheek still burned from Mercer's hand, yet her voice remained clear. I ask only this, that you do not let words erase recordings. Cameras do not panic. Servers do not improvise. Preserve the evidence. The phrase lingered like a bell in the chamber. Preserve the evidence. Mercer barked out a laugh, loud enough to jar the silence. She thinks this is her courtroom. Kendra's eyes didn't flinch. One day soon, it will be. The gallery shifted uneasily. Some chuckled nervously, others frowned at the strange certainty in her tone. Mercer smirked, convinced she was bluffing. Caleb and Daniel chuckled along, shaking their heads. To them, she was a cornered woman bluffing dignity. To the crowd, she was a puzzle, both condemned and compelling. The judge announced another short recess, his gavel striking lightly. This matter will resume after review. Officers, maintain custody. As people rose, their whispers filled the room again. Fraud. Impersonator. Too calm to be innocent. Mercer leaned close once more as he guided her toward the holding bench. Your mask is slipping. Soon everyone will see the criminal beneath. Kendra turned her head just enough for him to hear her reply. No, Officer Mercer. The mask that is slipping is yours. He scoffed, dragging her away. The gallery's whispers followed like shadows, heavy with suspicion. But beneath the noise, there was now a fracture. Doubt had entered the room. and doubt is the first crack through which truth begins to shine. The second recess ended with the heavy crack of the gavel. The courtroom rose, then settled once again into benches worn smooth by years of stories. People leaned forward, curious, restless, eager to see whether the performance of three officers would hold, or whether the quiet woman in cuffs would finally speak. Officer Grant Mercer stood again, shoulders broad, his hand brushing the badge on his chest as if it were a shield. "Your Honor," he began, "the matter is simple. This woman attempted to infiltrate the courthouse with false credentials, resisted a lawful arrest, and posed a risk to security. Myself and my fellow officers acted in full accordance with duty." Caleb Horn chimed in almost before Mercer finished, his tone sharp. "She was hostile, Your Honor. She disrespected commands. This behavior should not be excused." Daniel Ricks added the final note, his voice steady but hollow. "We urge the court to keep her detained until charges can be filed. Letting her walk would be reckless." The gallery murmured approval. It was an easy story to accept. 3 uniforms against one silent figure. Safety against chaos. Order against disruption. But then, Kendra Lawson lifted her head. Her wrists were still bound, her cheek still stung with the memory of Mercer's slap, but her voice came steady, shaped by years of knowing when silence ended and speech began. "Your Honor," she said softly, yet the room stilled to hear. "They have accused me of impersonation, of fraud, of aggression. But accusations are not proof, and proof does not vanish simply because someone claims a camera has failed." The judge frowned slightly, tapping his pen against the desk. The words were cautious, professional, restrained. They did not sound like the voice of a desperate woman. They sounded like a lawyer's clarity. Mercer sneered. "Listen to her. She's rehearsed. That tone? That's no ordinary citizen. She's pretending." Kendra turned her gaze directly toward him. "Pretending?" "No, officer. Preserving. That is the word. I request, formally, that every recording from today be preserved. Every hallway camera, every security feed, every body camera backup. If you claim malfunction, then let us see whether malfunction agrees with you." The gallery shifted. Her words rang with something unfamiliar. Confidence backed by knowledge. Not frantic, not defensive. Instead, precise. Caleb barked a laugh. "This is absurd. Who does she think she is, demanding preservation orders?" Kendra's eyes did not waver. "Someone who understands that justice requires evidence, and someone who knows the law demands that evidence be protected." The temporary judge leaned back in his chair. He had not expected this. He cleared his throat. "The request is unusual, but it is not without precedent. Court records can order preservation in matters of dispute." Mercer stiffened, his jaw tightening. He had not counted on the judge even entertaining the request. He turned, facing the gallery. "See what she's doing? She's manipulating, making demands like she belongs here." Kendra answered without raising her voice. "I do belong here, and so do the cameras and the recordings and the truth." The hush that followed was heavier than any gavel. The gallery murmurs faltered. Some exchanged glances. The performance of Mercer and his men still held sway. But now there was a new script on the table, one that spoke of procedure, evidence, and accountability. The judge leaned forward. "Very well. The request for preservation of security recordings will be noted and referred to clerks for immediate action." Mercer's face flushed. "Your Honor, this is a distraction. Criminals often try to muddy waters with technicalities." Kendra's lips curved into the faintest trace of a smile. The difference, officer, is that water can be muddied, but truth remains clear. It waits at the bottom, steady and unmoved. Her words unsettled even those who wanted to believe Mercer. The gallery began to murmur again, but this time, the notes were mixed. Doubt had returned, stronger now, whispering that perhaps the officer's story was too rehearsed, too perfect. Daniel stepped forward quickly, trying to rescue the crumbling edge. Your Honor, we cannot waste time on her requests. She is clearly manipulating the process to buy herself credibility. But the judge shook his head. Process exists for fairness, Officer Ricks. The court will not ignore it. Kendra bowed her head briefly. Thank you, Your Honor. Her wrists were still bound, her freedom still denied, but for the first time she had shifted the ground beneath her. The officers had shouted, accused, and stacked lies high. She had spoken only a few sentences, but those sentences had weight. They hinted at knowledge, at legitimacy, at something Mercer had not foreseen. The gallery felt it too. Whispers carried not just suspicion, but curiosity now. Who is she? How does she know so much? Mercer scowled, stepping closer until his voice was low, meant only for her. Careful. You think you're clever, but one slip and this whole place will eat you alive. Kendra met his glare, calm as still water. Then I'll let them see who's really standing in the light when the eating is done. His smirk faltered, though he quickly masked it. He gestured to Caleb and Daniel, as if their unity could restore control. Yet the shift had happened. The woman in cuffs no longer looked like a silent suspect. She looked like someone waiting for the moment truth would arrive. The judge rapped his gavel again. We will recess briefly. Upon return, we will review preliminary documentation. The courtroom rose with a rustle of robes and shoes. The gallery spilled into whispers. Some still repeated Mercer's words. Fraud, impersonation, aggression. But others now whispered questions. Why does she sound like she belongs here? And as she was led once again toward the holding bench, Kendra allowed herself a single deep breath. The humiliation remained, but something new stirred beneath it. The first flicker of resistance, steady and unstoppable. Because even bound hands can still hold truth. The courtroom filled again after recess, shoes scuffing against marble, benches creaking as spectators returned to their seats. The gallery buzzed with divided whispers, some certain the woman in cuffs was a fraud, others unsettled by her calm authority. When the judge called for order, Officer Grant Mercer wasted no time. He rose with the confidence of a man who believed his story was winning. His words came loud, sharp, meant to hammer nails into a coffin he had built out of lies. Your Honor, let us not be distracted. She stands here in chains because she forced her way into restricted space. We have 3 officers, 3 accounts, all consistent. She is a danger, a pretender, and possibly part of a larger scheme. The judge nodded slightly, scribbling again on his pad. Caleb Horn stepped forward, eager to reinforce. That's right. Her behavior was deceptive from the start. When we asked for identification, what she produced looked fabricated, an attempt to impersonate an official. I've seen forgeries before. This fit the pattern. Daniel Ricks added solemnly, and when pressed, she grew defensive. That's what fraudsters do. They hide behind false confidence. The words landed heavy in the gallery. Fraud, scheme, danger. The labels circled like birds of prey, tightening the noose around her dignity. Then, at last, Kendra Lawson raised her cuffed hands just slightly, the chains clinking like a bell summoning silence. Her voice was low but carried across the room. "You accuse me of falsehood. You claim forgery. Then let the court see what is real." From the inner pocket of her coat, still draped over the chair beside her, an officer retrieved the leather-bound case she had carried that morning. Mercer had confiscated it quickly at the steps, but he had never opened it. "Go on," Kendra said. "Read it." The judge gestured for the case to be brought forward. With measured hands, the clerk opened it, pulling out a thick identification card embossed with a golden seal. The gallery leaned forward, straining to see. The judge adjusted his glasses, reading silently, his brow furrowed, his lips parted as if to speak, then closed again. He looked down at the card, back at Kendra, then again at the seal gleaming under the courtroom lights. Mercer barked before the silence could deepen. Fake. A convincing copy, perhaps, but nothing more. Criminals are clever. You can't let her trick you. Caleb hurried in. Exactly. Counterfeits are designed to fool the eye. Don't fall for it, Your Honor. Daniel nodded quickly. We mustn't be swayed by props. She's playing a part. The gallery erupted into murmurs again, half accepting, half curious. Could it really be forged? The golden seal glimmered too perfectly, the lettering too official. Doubt spread like ripples, colliding with belief. Kendra spoke again, each word clear. This is not a prop. This is my identification, and this court has the means to confirm it within minutes. Call your clerks. Check your registry. You will find my name recorded. Her voice was not pleading. It was steady, professional, almost ceremonial. Mercer leaned forward, his smirk sharpened with mockery. She talks like she knows the system. That's her trick. Your Honor, don't humor this act. But the judge hesitated. The weight of her tone, the precision of her request. It was not the rhythm of someone improvising. It was the cadence of someone who knew exactly where she stood. I will direct the clerk to verify, the judge said at last. His gavel tapped once, soft but decisive. Until then, the accused remains in custody. The gallery hummed again, whispers darting across the benches like restless shadows. Some muttered about clever scams. Others exchanged wary glances. What if it's real? Mercer's jaw tightened. He leaned close to Kendra as the clerk stepped away with the card. His voice dropped to a whisper, filled with venom. You think flashing a seal changes anything? I've buried people like you with less. Kendra's eyes lifted to meet his, calm, unshaken. Then you buried shadows, but shadows always vanish when the light arrives. Her words carried just enough to be overheard by the nearest row of spectators. A few eyes widened, unsettled by her certainty. Caleb muttered angrily, She's stalling, buying time. That's all this is. Daniel nodded. Exactly. A desperate con. But the gallery wasn't so sure anymore. They had seen the seal. They had heard her composure. For the first time, the wall of uniformed voices didn't feel unbreakable. Minutes later, the clerk returned, papers in hand, whispering to the judge. His eyes widened slightly before he masked it with professional restraint. He tapped his pen, then set the papers aside. Mercer caught the flicker. What is it, Your Honor? Surely you see through her. The judge only said, This matter will be held for further review. Court is in recess once more. His gavel cracked down. The gallery buzzed louder than ever. Some voices rose with suspicion, others with awe. The officers shifted uneasily, trying to maintain their smirks, but failing to hide the tension creeping into their posture. As she was led once more toward the holding bench, Kendra walked with the quiet dignity of someone who had planted a seed. The gallery still whispered fraud, but now it whispered something else too. Possibility. Because a seal had glimmered in the light. Because her words had sounded too much like law to be dismissed. And though Mercer laughed loudly as if victory were still his, the echo of her calm voice lingered stronger than his noise. The stage was shifting. The wall of lies was beginning to show cracks. The gavel cracked once, not loud but firm, and the temporary judge declared, "This court will stand in recess." The room stirred immediately. Benches groaned as people rose, voices swelling into overlapping whispers. The heavy doors opened with a sigh, spilling murmurs into the marble hallway. The gallery did not rush out. They lingered, eager to feed on the spectacle they believed they had just witnessed. Officer Grant Mercer straightened his shoulders, his chest rising like a victor after a battle. His lips curled into a smirk that stretched across his face with effortless arrogance. To him, the game was over. He had 3 voices against 1, the gallery nodding, the judge taking notes in his favor. He believed the humiliation was complete. Caleb Horn leaned toward him, voice low but eager. "Told you, Grant. She's finished. They'll throw her out before the day ends." Daniel Ricks chuckled softly. "You saw the way the crowd looked at her. Suspicious. She doesn't stand a chance. It's done." Mercer glanced toward the holding bench, where Kendra Lawson sat with her wrists still bound. She was silent, her posture composed, her hands folded neatly in her lap as if she were waiting for a train rather than sitting under accusation. Her expression carried no panic, no visible fear. Mercer scoffed under his breath. "Look at her. Doesn't even fight anymore. She knows she's beaten." But that wasn't what the gallery saw. To them, the image was confusing. They expected trembling, tears, apologies. Instead, they saw a woman sitting still, back straight, eyes steady, as though she carried more patience than the entire room combined. Whispers rippled through the benches. "She'll be thrown out." Fraud, clearly. But she doesn't look scared, does she? Maybe it's just arrogance. Or maybe she knows something. The murmurs twisted together like threads of a rope, some dark, some light, some fraying with uncertainty. Kendra did not glance at the spectators. Her gaze rested quietly on the carved seal above the bench, the symbol of justice itself. To anyone watching closely, her stillness looked less like defeat and more like preparation. The bailiff shifted uncomfortably by the door, watching Mercer's swagger, then Kendra's calm. He said nothing, but his eyes narrowed as if he could sense that something in the balance was not as final as Mercer believed. Mercer leaned closer to Caleb and Daniel, his tone dripping with satisfaction. "When this recess is over, the judge will dismiss her with prejudice. No way back. She'll crawl out of here humiliated, and everyone will remember it." Caleb chuckled, nodding. "You did good, Grant. Textbook takedown." Daniel smirked. "She won't dare show her face in this building again." But Kendra's silence was not surrender. It was patience. Every second of recess, she folded into stillness, conserving her strength, her expression as composed as a statue carved from stone. Her hands, though chained, rested neatly in her lap. Her breathing was even, unhurried. One clerk, passing by with a stack of files, slowed his steps and glanced at her. Something in her calm unsettled him. He whispered to another clerk, "She looks certain, doesn't she?" The other clerk shrugged nervously. "Certain of what?" "That this isn't over." The gallery's whispers grew sharper, slicing through the air. "She'll be thrown out. Watch, they'll fine her for contempt. She's dangerous. Just look at the way she stares." But under those judgments, another whisper emerged, quieter, hesitant. Or maybe she's not the one on trial at all. No one answered, but the thought lingered. Mercer noticed the shift. His smirk faltered for just a moment. Then he forced it back. He could not afford doubt. To him, control meant repetition. He whispered to his colleagues again, "Remember the story. Stick to it. Don't break, she'll fold before we do." Caleb nodded firmly. "We've got this," Daniel added. 3 against 1. Always wins. At the holding bench, Kendra closed her eyes for a brief moment, not in despair, but in focus. She inhaled deeply, slowly, letting the air settle her heartbeat. The sting on her cheek was still there, but it no longer burned. It had become a reminder. Her wrists still ached, but pain had turned into resolve. When she opened her eyes, they were clear, steady, sharp with patience. She looked not at Mercer, not at the gallery, but at the empty judge's chair, the seat of truth, the chair where she belonged. The recess stretched on, filled with murmurs, footsteps, the occasional cough. People returned from the hallway with coffee cups, whispering fresh speculations into eager ears. Some laughed about her performance. Others shook their heads, already anticipating her dismissal. And still, she sat, hands folded, back straight, silent. It was the kind of silence that unsettles because it does not break. The kind of silence that does not admit defeat, but waits for its appointed time. Mercer noticed it again. An unease pricked the edge of his smirk. He leaned close to her, his voice sharp but low. "Why don't you tremble? Why don't you beg? You know it's over." Kendra turned her head slightly, her eyes meeting his with calm fire. "Because it hasn't begun." The words landed like a quiet hammer, soft but unshakable. Mercer's grin faltered, just for an instant, before he forced it back into place. The bailiff stepped forward. "Court will resume in 5 minutes." The gallery stirred again, rising in anticipation. Some leaned eagerly, waiting for the moment of final humiliation. Others leaned back, unsure now, unsettled by the woman's calm. Mercer adjusted his tie, puffed his chest, and whispered to Caleb and Daniel, "This is it. Watch her crumble." But at the holding bench, Kendra adjusted nothing. She only folded her hands once more, breathed deeply, and waited. Because she knew what they did not. Recess was not the end. It was the pause before revelation. And when the doors closed again, and the command, "All rise," echoed across the room, nothing in this courtroom would ever be the same. The bailiff's voice cut across the rising murmur of the gallery. "Court will reconvene. All rise." The words carried with them a kind of ritual weight. Shoes scraped against the marble floor, benches shifted, and every head turned instinctively toward the tall wooden doors at the side of the chamber. People expected to see the same presiding judge step forward. They expected to see the case resume, the woman in cuffs still seated at the front, like an accused figure waiting for her sentence. But expectation has a way of breaking when truth decides to walk through the door. The doors opened with a hush of hinges. For a heartbeat, silence pressed down on the room. Then, through the opening, she appeared. Kendra Lawson, not in cuffs, not in humiliation, but in the flowing black robe of a judge, its folds catching the light, its weight carrying centuries of authority. The gallery gasped. Some hands flew to mouths. Others froze mid-motion, coffee cups suspended, whispers choked in throats. The air itself seemed to stop moving as realization spread like a shockwave. She walked with steady grace down the aisle toward the bench. Each step echoed against marble like a drumbeat. calm and inevitable. The very same figure they had watched dragged in chains now moved with the dignity of command. Mercer's smirk collapsed. His lips parted, but no sound came out. Caleb blinked rapidly, confusion written across his face. Daniel took half a step backward, as though retreating from a truth too sharp to face. The bailiff's voice rang again, this time trembling faintly with awe. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Lawson." Every person in the gallery, whether they wanted to or not, rose to their feet. The ritual could not be denied. Even Mercer stood, his knees locking tight, his jaw clenched with the weight of disbelief. Kendra climbed the steps, her robe trailing behind her like a banner of justice reclaimed. She reached the bench, turned, and seated herself with quiet authority. Silence thundered through the chamber. Her hands rested calmly on the desk before her, no longer bound, no longer accused. The gavel gleamed at her side, the seal of the court rising behind her. For a long moment, she let the silence do its work. It was heavier than any word, more piercing than any accusation. The same gallery that had whispered fraud and impersonation now stood frozen, confronted with undeniable truth. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, resonant, carrying through every corner of the room. "This court is now in session." Gasps rippled again. Some spectators sat down slowly, dazed, as if they had just woken from a dream. Others exchanged wide-eyed glances, whispering in disbelief. Mercer swallowed hard. His mouth opened, but nothing came. For once, he could not summon words to spin. Caleb and Daniel shifted nervously, eyes darting anywhere but the bench. Kendra let her gaze rest on them, one by one. Mercer first, the man who had struck her on the courthouse steps. Caleb next, the echo who had nodded eagerly. Daniel last, the voice that had reinforced every lie. Her tone carried no malice, only precision. "You stand in this courtroom today not as enforcers of order, but as witnesses to truth. And truth has a way of speaking, whether you permit it or not." The gallery's silence deepened. Even the shuffling of papers ceased. No one dared break the moment. Mercer's lips finally moved, trembling with denial. This is a setup, a trick." Kendra's eyes met his, calm but unyielding. The only trick was believing lies could hold forever. That season is over. This court will hear the truth. She lifted the gavel, striking it once. The sharp crack reverberated like thunder, sealing the transformation of the scene. The gallery flinched as though the sound itself carried judgment. Some spectators whispered again, but this time the tone had shifted. "She's the judge. She was in chains, and now she's in robes. How is this possible?" Possible or not, the reality stood before them. The same woman humiliated moments ago, now presided with authority undeniable. Mercer's face flushed crimson. He clenched his fists, his entire body trembling with rage and disbelief. Caleb leaned towards him, whispering urgently, but Mercer barely heard. His eyes were locked on the bench, on the woman who had turned his lies into ash simply by standing where she belonged. Kendra looked toward the clerks. "Bring the case records forward." "Yes, Your Honor," the clerk stammered, moving quickly, almost tripping over his own feet. The sound of papers sliding across wood broke the silence like rain after drought. Kendra turned back to the officers. "In this court, evidence will speak, not rumor, not arrogance, not lies shouted loud enough to drown whispers. Evidence. We will begin with the recordings." The words fell with weight, and the officers knew what they meant. Panic flickered across their faces, a sudden shadow replacing the arrogance that had carried them this far. Mercer finally found his voice, a desperate rasp. "You can't!" But Kendra cut him off with a single strike of the gavel. "This court will not hear interruptions. You will sit, you will wait, and you will listen." The gallery gasped again. To them it was theater, shock and reversal, a scene out of story. But to Mercer, Caleb, and Daniel, it was far worse. It was the crumbling of the false wall they had built with words, brick by brick, now shattering in front of everyone. Kendra let the silence settle once more, then leaned slightly forward. "Officer Mercer, Officer Horn, Officer Ricks, in the minutes to come, the recordings will be brought. The cameras you claimed were broken, the files you claimed were missing, and when they speak, the truth will stand taller than every story you told." The gallery shivered with anticipation. Some clutched their coats tighter. Others leaned forward, eyes wide, unable to look away. Mercer's smirk was gone. His face was a storm of fear and fury. Caleb's hands shook slightly. Daniel avoided every gaze. And behind the bench, Judge Lawson rested her hands calmly once more. She had endured humiliation in silence. She had sat in chains without trembling. But now the silence belonged to her, and it was sharper than any blade. The recess had ended. The performance was finished. The trial of truth was about to begin. The courtroom no longer felt like the same chamber it had been before the recess. The benches, the seal above the bench, the tall windows catching pale daylight. Everything looked unchanged, but the atmosphere had shifted entirely. Where once the officers had stood tall and smug, now they shifted uneasily, trying to recover a confidence that kept slipping away. And at the center of it all, Judge Kendra Lawson sat with calm certainty. The black robe draped across her shoulders like a mantle of truth reclaimed. Her gavel rested lightly beneath her hand. She didn't need to raise her voice. The robe, the bench, and her stillness spoke louder than shouting ever could. "Officers Mercer, Horn, and Ricks," she said evenly. "This court will now address the claims you have made. You insisted my identification was false, that my presence was fraudulent, and that my demeanor was aggressive. Yet I now sit before you as the presiding judge of this very court. The record reflects my appointment. The seal confirms it. Your words, therefore, already tremble against the truth." Mercer's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. His fists clenched and unclenched at his sides. This can't stand. There must be some mistake." Kendra tilted her head slightly, her expression calm. "The only mistake, Officer Mercer, would be assuming that lies spoken in unison can outweigh evidence." A low murmur rippled through the gallery. People who had whispered about fraud and impersonation only minutes ago now whispered about something else entirely. What happens to them now? Caleb Horn broke first. His voice, usually sharp, cracked with nervousness. "Your Honor, we only acted on what we thought was best for security. Maybe there was a misunderstanding." Daniel Ricks jumped in quickly, trying to shield himself with vagueness. "Yes, Your Honor. Miscommunication. That's all it was." Mercer shot them both a glare, a silent warning not to unravel, but their eyes betrayed the panic he was trying to contain. Kendra's voice cut through the noise, steady as steel wrapped in silk. "This court will no longer tolerate vague claims. The time for stories is over. The time for evidence begins now." She turned toward the clerk. "Bring forward the surveillance footage from the courthouse steps, all available angles." The clerk hurried, almost tripping as he rushed to comply. The weight of the moment pressed against every wall, as though the room itself were waiting to see what truth looked like when stripped bare. Mercer tried again, voice louder but less certain than before. "Your Honor, these requests are irregular. The equipment fails all the time. It's unreliable. Surely the court can't base its judgment on—" Kendra lifted the gavel and struck once. The sound cracked like thunder. "You will not interrupt this proceeding again. Sit down." The gallery gasped. Mercer froze, his jaw clamped shut. The sound of the gavel echoed, each beat of silence after it cutting deeper into his authority. He sat, though every muscle in his body screamed to resist. Caleb and Daniel followed quickly, their movements stiff and nervous. Kendra turned back to the gallery, her gaze sweeping across the benches. This court will see the truth, and when it is seen, it will not be forgotten. Those who doubted, those who whispered, watch closely. Watch how easily lies collapse when light is brought in. The gallery shifted again. Some leaned forward, eager. Others shrank back, ashamed of the whispers they had spoken earlier. Kendra rested her hands on the bench once more, calm, steady, commanding. Her dignity filled the chamber, replacing the earlier humiliation with a presence undeniable. For Mercer, Caleb, and Daniel, the air had grown heavier. They whispered urgently among themselves, voices low but frantic. "What do we do if the footage shows it?" Daniel hissed. "Shut up," Mercer growled. "We'll claim tampering. Always works. No one trusts video these days." Caleb's eyes darted nervously. "But what if it's too clear?" Mercer's fists clenched again, his knuckles pale. "Then we fight harder. Don't show weakness. That's the rule." But weakness was already seeping into their voices, their posture, their eyes. Kendra leaned forward slightly, her tone measured. "Officers, you believed my silence was weakness. You believed my dignity was a mask. But silence is not surrender. It is preparation. And dignity is not disguise. It is armor. The truth you buried is rising, and you will see its face." Her words struck deeper than the gavel. The gallery fell utterly silent, the weight of her authority undeniable. The clerk reappeared with a laptop connected to the courtroom monitor. Screens flickered, wires hummed. The moment stretched like a bowstring drawn tight, every heartbeat another notch of suspense. "Your Honor," the clerk said quietly, "the footage is ready." Kendra nodded once. "Proceed." All eyes turned to the screen. Mercer shifted uncomfortably, sweat beginning to bead at his temple. Caleb and Daniel glanced at one another, the thin veneer of unity cracking. The gallery leaned forward, the hush of anticipation heavy as stone. And Kendra Lawson, once dragged in chains, now seated in robes, watched with calm resolve. This was not revenge. This was not performance. This was truth stepping onto the stage it had always owned. The lights dimmed slightly as the clerk connected the monitor, the screen flickering to life with the pale glow of surveillance footage. The courtroom held its breath. No whisper dared disturb the air. Even the shuffling of papers had stopped, as though the room itself wanted nothing to interrupt what was coming. Judge Kendra Lawson leaned back slightly, her robe pooling around her shoulders, her eyes steady on the screen. She gave a single nod. "Play the recording." The clerk clicked the file. The footage began. At first, the black and white feed showed only the courthouse steps, stone pillars, people passing by, a few reporters milling with their cameras. It looked ordinary, uneventful. Then, a figure appeared, Kendra herself. walking with calm purpose toward the entrance. The gallery shifted, murmurs rising as they recognized her. The woman they had whispered about, judged, suspected. Now she appeared on the screen exactly as she had that morning. Steady stride, papers in hand, dignity unshaken. A beat later, another figure stormed into frame. Officer Grant Mercer, his expression sharp, his body language already aggressive. The footage showed him stepping directly into her path, barking words. The audio did not carry from the outdoor camera, but the gestures were unmistakable. His hand shot out, grabbing her arm, gasps rippled through the gallery. And then it happened. The slap. Even in grainy footage, the movement was clear. Mercer's hand whipped across her face, her head snapping to the side. She staggered, stunned, yet did not retaliate. The sound wasn't audible, but in the room it might as well have been thunder. The gallery flinched, some spectators covering their mouths in shock. The footage continued. Mercer shoved her against the stone wall, pressing his forearm into her shoulder. Her papers scattered to the ground. He pulled out his cuffs and snapped them onto her wrists with unnecessary force. The crowd in the video reacted, onlookers raising phones, some stepping back in alarm. A few even tried to speak, but Mercer turned, his posture commanding, barking more words into the air. Inside the courtroom, people whispered urgently, "He hit her. I saw it. He hit her. She wasn't resisting." Kendra's eyes never left the screen. She sat steady, watching her own humiliation unfold, but her voice was calm when she spoke. Pause there. The footage froze on the image of Mercer pinning her against the wall. Judge Lawson turned her gaze toward the officers. Her voice was measured, deliberate. "You claimed she resisted. Do you see resistance here?" Caleb shifted uncomfortably. "The camera angle, it doesn't capture everything. She could have... Do you see resistance here?" Kendra repeated, her tone sharp but controlled. Caleb faltered, lips pressing tight. Daniel avoided her eyes altogether. Mercer's face burned red. He slammed a fist against the table. "This footage is incomplete. It doesn't show what led up to it. She must have done something off camera." The gallery murmured again, louder this time. A man in the back row muttered, "I was there. She didn't do anything. I saw the whole thing." Another voice joined. "He struck her without cause. I saw it too." Kendra struck the gavel once, the sound echoing. "Order. The court will remain silent until directed." The murmurs died instantly, though the shock still rippled through every face. Kendra turned back to Mercer. "You claimed malfunction, yet the surveillance is clear. You claimed she was aggressive, yet the footage shows calm steps. You claimed impersonation, yet the only performance here is yours." Mercer clenched his jaw, his voice rising in desperation. "The video's been tampered with. That's the only explanation." Kendra leaned forward slightly, her eyes piercing his. "Tampered? By whom? The building's cameras feed directly to secure servers. Are you suggesting the entire courthouse conspired to edit this footage within the last hour?" Mercer's mouth opened, then closed. Words failed him. The gallery laughed nervously, a low ripple that embarrassed even those who had once doubted her. Kendra let the silence hang before she nodded to the clerk. "Continue playback." The footage rolled again. Mercer dragged Kendra toward the courthouse doors, her head held high despite the cuffs. Caleb and Daniel appeared in frame, stepping into the scene. Their gestures matched their testimony in court, but the context was different. They did not stop an aggressor. They joined a man already assaulting a restrained woman. Daniel gestured animatedly, pointing at her papers, while Caleb nodded with exaggerated force, backing Mercer's words. To the watching gallery, it looked less like truth and more like rehearsed theater. The screen went black as the clip ended. The lights of the courtroom seemed brighter afterward, harsher against faces turned pale with realization. Judge Lawson's voice filled the space, calm and precise. The record now reflects that the testimony given earlier contradicts the surveillance evidence. Officer Mercer, you struck and restrained me without cause. Officers Horn and Ricks, you supported his false account. The gallery erupted. Some gasped, others shook their heads in disbelief. A few clapped before catching themselves, silenced by the weight of the moment. Mercer slammed his hand again, his voice breaking. This doesn't prove anything. Video can lie. Kendra lifted her gavel, striking once. The sound rang like iron. Evidence will speak louder than your protests, and this is only the beginning. The gallery hushed once more, hanging on her words. For the officers, panic was no longer distant. It was here, crawling across their skin, sinking into their voices. They shifted in their seats, their arrogance dissolving like salt in water. And for the first time, the balance of the room had shifted entirely. The woman once dragged in chains now sat in command, her humiliation transformed into authority. The first crack had opened wide. The wall of lies was falling, and this was only the first reveal. The gallery had not recovered from what it had just witnessed. Even as the monitor went dark, people whispered fiercely among themselves. Some leaned forward with eyes wide. Others sat frozen, stunned by the reversal. A few shook their heads as though trying to dislodge the memory of Mercer's hand striking across Kendra's face. At the bench, Judge Lawson let the silence linger just long enough. She wanted the truth to settle, to leave its imprint on the room. Then, with calm certainty, she turned back to the clerk. Bring forward the body camera backups. Every device in use this morning has a secondary recording system that uploads automatically to the secure server. Retrieve those files now. The gallery stirred again. The words carried weight. Everyone in the room had heard Mercer claim earlier that his body camera had malfunctioned. If what she said was true, then his excuse would be stripped bare. Mercer's face drained of color. His jaw worked as he tried to summon protest, but only fragments came out. Those systems, they glitch. It's not reliable data. Kendra raised the gavel slightly, her tone cutting clean through his stammer. Officer Mercer, enough. The cameras were not toys. They were not decorations. They were safeguards. Safeguards against the very abuse you committed. The bailiff escorted the technician from the evidence department to the front. He was a nervous young man carrying a laptop under his arm, his badge clipped loosely to his pocket. He bowed slightly toward Judge Lawson. Your Honor, the backups are intact. The files are time-stamped and verified? Proceed, Kendra said simply. The screen lit once more. This time, the footage came not from the fixed courthouse cameras, but from Mercer's own body camera, the one he had sworn was broken. The video jolted into view, shaky with his movements, but clear. The audio filled the courtroom instantly. Step aside, woman. You don't belong here. The voice was Mercer's, unmistakable. His tone sharp, laced with contempt. Gasps rose from the gallery. The words hung heavy, direct, undeniable. The footage continued. His hand shot forward, the angle jarring as the camera caught his arm rising, the slap landing. Then came the sound. Clear, sharp, and sickening, the blow against her face. Whispers surged through the benches. He said it himself. No malfunction. He lied. The footage rolled on. Mercer's voice barked again. Put your hands behind your back now. You think you can walk in here like you own the place? Not on my watch. Then came Caleb's voice, clear as day. She flashed something. It looked fake. Can't be real. Followed by Daniel's mutter. Yeah, it's impersonation. She's faking it. The courtroom erupted in gasps once more. People turned toward the two officers, their faces blanching under the spotlight of their own voices. Kendra lifted her hand, striking the gavel once. Silence. The chamber stilled instantly. Continue the recording, she instructed. The footage captured the moment Mercer slammed her against the wall. Kendra's voice could be heard, calm but steady. You are making a mistake. This will not stand. Mercer's voice spat back. You think you're someone? You're nothing. You'll crawl out of here ashamed. The gallery murmured again, louder now, disbelief mixing with outrage. Kendra raised the gavel again, but this time she did not strike. Instead, she spoke slowly, letting each word pierce through the crowd. This is the evidence you claimed was lost. The truth you said did not exist. It shows not only the violence committed, but the words spoken. Words that betray intent. Words that reveal prejudice. Her gaze fixed firmly on Mercer, who sat rigid, his face twisted in fury and panic. Caleb shifted, sweat glistening at his temple. Daniel stared at the floor, his shoulders slumped. The video ended, the monitor went dark. But the silence that followed was louder than any recording. Judge Lawson folded her hands neatly on the bench. The record now reflects that each of you contributed to false testimony. The cameras did not malfunction. They spoke, and they spoke against you. Mercer shot to his feet, his voice breaking. This is tampering. Somebody doctored those files. It's not real. Kendra tilted her head. Tampering. Do you believe every server, every backup, every chain of custody conspired against you? Or perhaps the simpler truth is this. You believed lies would never be challenged. But the world has changed. Evidence survives even when arrogance insists it is gone. The gallery erupted with a low rumble, people nodding, whispering their agreement. What had once been suspicion toward Kendra had turned into scorn for the officers. Caleb raised his hands weakly. Your Honor, I didn't mean to. I only followed Mercer's lead. Daniel whispered. We thought we were protecting order. We didn't realize. But their voices only made them look smaller, reduced to excuses under the weight of their own recordings. Kendra lifted the gavel and brought it down firmly. Order. The sound reverberated again, silencing their stammers. Let the record reflect, she said calmly, that the voices we just heard belong to Officers Mercer, Horn, and Ricks. Let the record reflect that their earlier testimony directly contradicts the truth. And let this court acknowledge the very devices meant to ensure accountability have revealed corruption instead. The gallery rose with another wave of whispers, some shaking their heads, others murmuring, "Justice! Finally, justice!" Mercer slumped back into his chair, his face pale, his fists trembling. The swagger, the arrogance, the smirk, it had all melted away. In its place remained only fear and rage. Kendra looked at him once more. You thought silence was weakness, but silence was only waiting for the right time. And now, the time has come. The gavel struck again, and with that sound, the courtroom no longer belonged to Mercer and his lies. It belonged to truth, carried on the voices of the very cameras he had tried to silence. The body camera footage had left the courtroom in silence so heavy that even breathing seemed loud. Mercer sat stiff, his face pale, his fists trembling with a fury he could not unleash. Caleb's eyes darted nervously between the bench and the floor, while Daniel looked as if he wished the earth itself would open and swallow him whole. But Judge Kendra Lawson did not stop with video. She knew humiliation could be denied, words could be twisted, but numbers carried a weight harder to dismiss. She leaned forward slightly, her robe catching the light. The record has shown us images. The record has given us sound. But truth does not live only in what we see and hear. Truth also lives in patterns, and patterns are found in numbers. The gallery shifted uneasily. Statistics in court were unusual, but the authority in her voice made them lean closer. Kendra nodded to the clerk. Bring forward the compiled reports, use of force logs, complaint records, dismissal rates. Display them for the court. The clerk wheeled in a projector cart, its light flickering against the screen. Within moments, rows of figures and charts appeared. They were simple, easy to read. Bars, lines, percentages translated into plain comparisons. Kendra rose slightly, her hand guiding the room as though a teacher before a class. Let us begin with Officer Mercer's record. In the last 5 years, he has logged 87 arrests. Out of those, nearly 60 were dismissed before trial. That is almost 7 out of 10. Gasps rippled through the gallery. She softened the numbers for clarity. Imagine 10 cases brought before the court. In 6 of them, the charges collapsed. Not because the accused were guilty, but because the arrests were built on sand. She turned a page, and the next chart appeared. Colored bars climbing and falling like uneven towers. Now consider his use of force reports. Out of these 87 arrests, 39 involved physical force. That is almost half. Compare this to the department average of 1 out of 5. The gallery stirred again, whispers darting like sparks. Half? That's double. That's more than double. Kendra continued, her tone calm but firm. And look closer still. In those cases where force was used, more than 70% involved black citizens. 70 out of every 100. A disparity so sharp it cuts through excuses. The murmurs grew louder now, outrage mixing with disbelief. Kendra's voice did not rise, but its steadiness made it resonate. Complaints were filed, dozens. Citizens reported excessive force, verbal abuse, intimidation. Yet in the official records, nearly every complaint was marked the same. Dismissed, insufficient evidence, not sustained. The pattern repeats so neatly, it no longer looks like coincidence. It looks like protection. Mercer shifted violently in his chair, his voice breaking. These numbers, these charts, they're taken out of context. Every arrest is different. Statistics don't tell the whole story. Kendra fixed her gaze on him, her tone sharp but composed. Statistics do not tell stories. They reveal patterns. And when patterns show harm repeated, dismissed, and buried, the story tells itself. The gallery erupted again. Some spectators shook their heads, muttering that they had long suspected such truths. Others gasped as if hearing these disparities for the first time. One man whispered, 70%. That's not chance. That's intent. A woman added, no wonder cases kept disappearing. Kendra struck the gavel once, not to silence outrage, but to focus it. The sound echoed like a drumbeat of judgment. The law is not blind when records are this clear, she said. It sees the weight of repeated actions. It sees how silence in oversight allowed patterns of abuse to harden into practice. Caleb finally broke under the pressure, his voice trembling. We just followed Mercer's lead. We trusted his judgment. We didn't check the numbers. Daniel muttered. We didn't even know the stats were that bad. Kendra's eyes swept over them unflinching. Ignorance is not innocence. Silence is not protection. When you stand beside lies, you become part of them. The gallery hummed with agreement. Some nodded fiercely. Others sat with arms crossed, their skepticism dissolved by the clarity of the charts. Kendra gestured to the final slide. This chart shows the dismissal rates across the department compared to Mercer's. In the department as a whole, dismissal hovers near 20%. For Mercer, it is nearly 70%. One officer alone carries a pattern so stark, it stains the Ya'iatam badge itself. Her hand lowered slowly, the projection casting shadows across her robe. These numbers are not my words. They are not my accusations. They are his record, his actions recorded by his own hand, filed by his own reports, preserved by his own department. And they reveal a truth far deeper than any one moment on those courthouse steps. The gallery sat in stunned silence, absorbing the weight of systemic failure. Kendra's voice softened, but it carried more force than shouting ever could. This case is not about a single slap, a single chokehold, or a single pair of handcuffs. It is about a pattern of power misused, of justice distorted, of dignity denied. It is about what happens when lies are protected and truth is silenced. And today, in this court, that silence ends. Her gavel struck once, sharp and final. The officers flinched, the gallery gasped, and the system itself seemed to shudder beneath the force of what had just been spoken. The charts still glowed faintly on the courtroom screen, bars and numbers that had stripped away years of excuses. The gallery sat stunned, whispering in uneasy tones. The tide had shifted fully. Where once their doubt had pointed toward Kendra, now every eye in the chamber turned to the three officers who had tried to bury her beneath lies. Judge Lawson allowed the silence to linger. It pressed down like a weight, forcing the accused to feel every gaze. Then she spoke, her voice calm but resonant. Officers Mercer, Horn, and Ricks, your testimony now lies in conflict with evidence both visual and statistical. This court requires clarity. Officer Mercer, you will explain yourself. Mercer shifted in his chair, his jaw tight, his hands gripping the edge of the table until his knuckles whitened. He opened his mouth, but instead of strength, his words tumbled out in a rush. It wasn't me alone. Caleb was the one who confirmed her documents looked fake. Daniel said she was resisting. We acted together. You can't pin this all on me. Gasps rippled through the gallery. The man who had led the charge now tried to scatter blame like shards of glass, hoping one piece might stick somewhere else. Caleb's head snapped toward Mercer. That's not fair. You gave the order. You were the one who struck her, not me. Daniel's voice cracked. You told us to back you up, Grant. You said she was dangerous. We trusted your word. The gallery murmured louder now, some shaking their heads at the spectacle. Only hours earlier, these three had been a perfect chorus, voices blending seamlessly in accusation. Now their harmony broke into discordant noise. Kendra's gaze was steady, her robe dark against the bench. She leaned forward slightly. Officer Mercer, you testified that she resisted arrest, yet in the footage, she did not. Do you wish to amend your statement? Mercer's face burned red. She resisted in spirit. You can't see it on the video, but I could feel it. Anyone would have felt it. Kendra struck the gavel once. The sound was sharp, dismissing his flimsy defense. Feelings are not evidence. Truth is not measured by fear or convenience. It is measured by what is seen, what is heard, what is recorded. The gallery murmured agreement. A woman whispered loudly enough for her row to hear. "He's scrambling." Kendra turned her gaze now to Caleb. "Officer Horn, you testified her identification was forged, yet the registry confirmed my appointment. Do you retract your words?" Caleb stammered. I thought it looked wrong. I was only trying to support protocol." "Support protocol," Kendra repeated softly. "Or support a lie?" Caleb's lips trembled. He looked away, unable to answer. Kendra's eyes shifted to Daniel. "Officer Ricks, you testified that she raised her voice, that she was hostile, yet the recordings show her calm. Do you retract your words?" Daniel swallowed hard. His voice was small. I was wrong." The gallery gasped again, some leaning forward as if to catch every syllable. The collapse of certainty was happening before their eyes. Mercer slammed his fist against the table. "Cowards! Both of you! Don't you see what's happening? She's twisting everything. You're going to let her destroy us?" Caleb shot back, his voice high with panic. "You destroyed us the moment you hit her. Don't drag me down with you." Daniel shook his head furiously. "We only followed you because we thought it was right. But it wasn't. We see that now." The gallery erupted into whispers again. What had once been a chorus of accusation was now a spectacle of betrayal. Their unity had shattered, leaving only jagged contradictions scattered across the courtroom floor. Kendra lifted the gavel once more, striking it with controlled force. Order. The room stilled, but the image of officers scrambling to save themselves remained. It was a spectacle the gallery would not forget. The collapse of arrogance into desperation. "Let the record show," Kendra said clearly. "That testimony has shifted under the weight of evidence. Officer Mercer blames his colleagues. Officer Horn cannot defend his words. Officer Ricks retracts his. The harmony of falsehood has become discord. The court recognizes this collapse for what it is, the truth breaking through." Mercer shook his head violently. "This isn't over. I won't be the scapegoat for all of this." Kendra's eyes narrowed slightly, though her voice stayed calm. "Scapegoat? No. Accountability does not seek one goat to carry the burden. Accountability names each act for what it is, and each person for who they are. You will each answer, not for what you shared, but for what you chose." The gallery fell silent again, hanging on every word. They could sense the end approaching, the unraveling nearly complete. Caleb's voice cracked. "Your Honor, I didn't mean harm. I thought I was helping keep order, but I see now it was wrong." Daniel whispered, barely audible. "I regret it. I regret all of it." Mercer's chest rose and fell with fury. He glared at them both, his voice spitting venom. "You weak fools! You'd throw me to the wolves just to save your skins!" But the gallery no longer listened to his rage. Their eyes had shifted away from him, toward the bench where Judge Lawson sat, calm, composed, and immovable. Kendra let the silence settle once more, then struck the gavel. "This testimony has revealed the collapse of lies. The court will move forward to the formal charges." Gasps filled the room. The next step had come. The officers' scramble could no longer delay the inevitable. And in the gallery, people whispered what everyone now knew. The walls of deceit had fallen. Judgment was coming. The gallery had scarcely settled from the chaos of contradictions when Judge Kendra Lawson lifted her gavel. The sharp crack silenced the chamber. Every eye locked on her, every ear strained to catch what would come next. She straightened her robe, her face solemn, her voice carried with a weight that belonged not just to her, but to the centuries of law and conscience behind the bench. This court has heard your testimony. It has seen the recordings. It has reviewed the records. And it has watched as lies unraveled under the weight of truth. Now this court will speak plainly. The gallery leaned forward, benches creaking under the shift of bodies. A hush fell so complete that even the faint hum of the projector still cooling could be heard. Kendra looked directly at the three officers. Mercer's face was rigid, jaw clenched tight. Caleb sat pale, his hands twisting nervously. Daniel's shoulders sagged, his gaze fixed on the floor. Her voice rang clear. First, assault on a judicial officer. The words struck like a stone dropped in still water, sending ripples through the room. Gasps rose instantly. A judicial officer. The revelation carried fresh weight. The woman they had humiliated in cuffs was not only a judge now, but had been a judge then. Assaulting her was not only a crime of violence, but an attack on the very seat of law. Kendra continued, her tone even, deliberate. Second, deprivation of rights under color of law. You used the power of your badges to strip away liberty from one who had committed no offense. You turned duty into a weapon, law into a tool of humiliation. The gallery gasped again, louder this time. A man muttered, "That's federal, that's serious." Another whispered, "They abused power itself." Kendra raised her chin, her gaze never wavering. Third, perjury under oath. Each of you swore before this court to tell the truth. Yet your words, captured in this very chamber, stand in direct conflict with the evidence. False testimony is not error. It is betrayal. The words settled heavy as iron. Mercer's fists clenched. "This is outrageous. You're making it sound worse than it was. Kendra struck the gavel once, cutting him off. "This is not exaggeration. This is clarity. Assault, a deprivation of rights, perjury. Each charge carries weight. Each charge has been earned by your own actions." The gallery erupted again, voices rising in shock and fury. Some gasped, others murmured, others nodded fiercely, as if justice was finally stepping into the light. Caleb stammered, We didn't mean to." Daniel whispered hoarsely, "I didn't think it would come to this." But their words sounded small, feeble against the thunder of charges that now filled the courtroom. Kendra's voice softened, but the steel beneath it did not waver. "You wore uniforms meant to protect. You carried authority meant to serve. Instead, you turned them into shields for violence and props for lies. And you believed, as many before you have, that no one would ever call you to account." Her eyes swept the gallery now, ensuring that every spectator heard. Let this moment remind us all, power without truth is fragile, and lies, even when spoken in chorus, collapse the moment light falls upon them. The gallery responded with silence deeper than any noise. Some bowed their heads, some clenched their fists, some blinked back tears. Mercer's face was a storm, rage and fear colliding. He slammed his palm against the table. "You can't do this. You're not impartial. You're the one involved." Kendra's eyes narrowed slightly. "Not impartial? I am the one assaulted. And yet I have not raised my voice in anger. I have not exaggerated your acts. I have only named them. Impartiality is not silence in the face of harm. It is fairness, even when the truth cuts deep. She paused, her words measured, her gaze piercing Mercer's fury. You are angry because you have been named, but justice does not tremble when names are spoken. It grows stronger. Gasps echoed again, and the gallery sat straighter, as though bracing for the weight of the moment. Kendra let the silence settle once more before she concluded. The charges stand: assault on a judicial officer, deprivation of rights under color of law, and perjury under oath. The record reflects them. This court will proceed. Her gavel struck the bench with finality. The sound reverberated through the chamber like thunder rolling across open ground. For Mercer, Caleb, and Daniel, it was the sound of the ground cracking beneath their feet. For the gallery, it was the sound of truth restored. And for Kendra Lawson, it was the sound of justice beginning to speak, not just for herself, but for every voice silenced under lies. The courtroom hummed with shock after the charges were spoken. The gallery whispered in sharp fragments, voices colliding like waves. Assault on a judge, deprivation of rights, perjury. The words were heavy, carrying a weight too great to ignore. For a moment, Mercer sat rigid, his jaw locked tight, his eyes burning with fury. Then he rose slowly to his feet, his voice trembling at first, but gaining volume as he tried to summon back the authority that had slipped through his fingers. Your Honor, please, he began, his tone strained. This has gone too far. Yes, I acted forcefully on the steps, but it wasn't malice, it wasn't prejudice, it was confusion. I thought she was a threat. I thought she was trying to breach security. My actions were out of stress, not cruelty. The gallery stirred, some whispering skeptically, others watching to see how the judge would respond. Mercer pressed on, his voice cracking into something that almost sounded like pleading. I've served this city for years. I've worn this badge with pride. I've risked my life on the streets, faced danger no one else wanted to face. I am not a monster. I made a mistake. That's all. A mistake in a moment of tension. His words dangled in the air, reaching for sympathy. His shoulders slumped slightly, as if he hoped vulnerability might soften the judgment already bearing down. But Judge Lawson did not lean forward with compassion. She remained steady, her hands folded on the bench, her expression measured. When she spoke, her voice carried no malice, only truth. Officer Mercer, what you describe is not confusion. It is not a single mistake. It is a pattern. The recordings did not show hesitation. They showed certainty. Your words were not those of a man unsure. They were those of a man convinced of superiority. You struck, you restrained, and you mocked. That is not stress. That is choice. The gallery murmured again, some nodding, others muttering agreement. Kendra continued, her voice calm but cutting. And if this were only one day, perhaps your plea could hold weight. But the records tell another story. Dismissed charges, disproportionate force, complaints ignored. These are not accidents. They are footprints on a long road you chose to walk. Mercer's face flushed. He slammed his fist lightly against the table, his desperation spilling out. I'm not perfect. No officer is. But we live under pressure. Split-second choices. You can't understand what it's like. Kendra's eyes narrowed slightly, though her tone remained even. I understand pressure. Every judgment I render in this chamber carries weight over lives and futures. But pressure is not a license for injustice. It does not excuse false testimony. It does not excuse the stripping of rights. Pressure tests character, Officer Mercer. It does not erase accountability. The gallery gasped softly, the words sinking deep. A woman whispered. She dismantled him with one sentence. Mercer's shoulders sagged. His final defense, built on pleas of stress and confusion, had been stripped bare. He stood there, trembling, his lips moving but no words coming. It was Caleb who broke the silence next. His voice was shaky, his hands fidgeting. Your Honor, I didn't mean for it to go this far. I thought I was supporting order. I thought backing my partner was the right thing to do. But I see now, it wasn't. I was wrong. The gallery turned to him, surprised. His face was pale, his eyes damp with fear. He looked less like an officer now, and more like a man caught in a storm too large to control. Daniel added quickly, his voice hushed but audible. I admit it too. I repeated what Mercer said without thinking. I wanted to believe him. But I knew deep down it wasn't true. I regret it. I regret standing by him. The gallery erupted into whispers once more. Some scoffed at their sudden remorse. Others shook their heads, muttering that guilt had finally caught up when evidence left no escape. Kendra lifted the gavel but did not strike. Instead, she let the silence speak for a moment before responding. Remorse after exposure is not repentance, yet it is the first step. Officer Horn, Officer Ricks, you chose silence and complicity until the evidence left no room for denial. That does not erase guilt, but acknowledging it now may at least begin the road back to dignity. Caleb lowered his head, shame written across his face. Daniel nodded weakly, his voice breaking. Yes, Your Honor. Mercer glared at them both, his voice low and venomous. Cowards. You'd throw me under the bus to save your skins. But neither answered him. Their silence was louder than his rage. Kendra's eyes returned to Mercer. You sought sympathy but offered excuses. You sought leniency but brought only denial. The truth has spoken, Officer Mercer. Your defense has crumbled. The gallery murmured again, sensing the final weight of judgment pressing close. Kendra leaned forward slightly, her tone deliberate, each word measured. This court has heard the plea. It has seen the collapse. The time for defense is over. The time for verdict approaches. Her gavel struck once, firm and resonant. The gallery shivered at the sound, knowing the next act would be the one they had all been waiting for. The final judgment. The courtroom felt like a chamber of held breath. The air was heavy with anticipation, every eye fixed on the woman at the bench. Judge Kendra Lawson rested her hands calmly on the desk, her robe dark against the wood, her face solemn. The gallery sat frozen. Even those who had once doubted her now waited in silence, pulled by the gravity of the moment. Mercer shifted in his seat, sweat glistening at his temple. Caleb and Daniel stared down at their hands, pale and trembling. Kendra lifted the gavel lightly, but she did not strike yet. Instead, her voice rose with calm authority, carrying to every corner of the chamber. This court has heard your voices. It has seen your actions. It has weighed your excuses against evidence. And now, it will deliver its judgment. The I words rang like bells, clear and undeniable. She turned her gaze first to Mercer. Officer Grant Mercer, you struck, restrained, and humiliated a judicial officer. You used your badge not as a shield of protection, but as a weapon of dominance. You lied under oath, hoping arrogance would hold stronger than truth. The evidence has dismantled you. Mercer's face twisted, his lips trembling, but he said nothing. His silence was louder than any denial. Kendra's eyes moved to Caleb. Officer Caleb Horn, you lent your voice to lies. You saw falsehood and supported it, echoing deceit as though it were duty. Your silence when truth demanded speech became complicity. Caleb's head sank lower, his shame a visible weight. Then to Daniel. Officer Daniel Ricks, you followed the chorus, repeating what you knew was untrue. You let loyalty to arrogance outweigh loyalty to justice. That choice makes you guilty as well. Daniel closed his eyes, a tear slipping down his cheek. The gallery murmured softly, their whispers hushed by the solemnity of the moment. Kendra drew a breath, her tone steady but firm. This court finds you guilty. Not guilty because of my word alone, but guilty because of the record that spoke, the cameras that remembered, and the numbers that revealed patterns too deep to ignore. Guilty of assault on a judicial officer. Guilty of depriving rights under color of law. Guilty of perjury before this very court. The gavel struck once. The sound cracked through the chamber like lightning. Gasps filled the gallery. Some clapped a hand to their mouth, others nodded fiercely. The truth had been named. The verdict had been spoken. Mercer's body shook with rage, his fists pounding against the table. This is corruption. You set me up. This system has been against me from the start. Kendra's voice cut through his fury, calm but unyielding. No, Officer Mercer. This system protected you for years. It dismissed complaints. It ignored disparities. It buried records. Today is the first day it has stood against you. Do not mistake accountability for corruption. The gallery erupted in murmurs again. A man in the back whispered, "She's right. They covered for him all this time." Kendra's eyes swept across the chamber, including not just the accused, but every spectator present. This verdict is not about 3 men alone. It is about a culture that allowed arrogance to replace duty, silence to replace oversight, and fear to replace fairness. Today's judgment is not only theirs, it is a mirror held up to us all. The gallery hushed, her words sinking like stones into deep water. She leaned forward slightly, her voice soft but carrying more force than shouting ever could. Power without truth will always be judged. Whether in this courtroom or in the court of conscience, it cannot escape. Power is heavy, but truth is heavier still. And when the two collide, truth does not break. Lies do. The silence that followed was profound. The quote echoed, settling into the hearts of those who listened. Kendra lifted the gavel once more. Let the record reflect this verdict. Officers Mercer, Horn, and Ricks are guilty as charged. This court stands adjourned. The gavel struck again, final and unshakable. The room erupted. Some gasped, some clapped despite the solemnity. Others shook their heads in disbelief at the weight of the fall they had just witnessed. Mercer slumped into his chair, his fury drained into despair. Caleb wept silently, his shoulders trembling. Daniel pressed his palms to his face as though hiding from the truth itself. The gallery buzzed with energy, shock, vindication, awe. But amid the noise, one feeling rose above all: justice. And at the bench, Judge Lawson sat still, her robe draped across her shoulders, her expression neither triumphant nor bitter. It was calm, steady, the face of someone who had carried humiliation in silence, then turned it into dignity and truth. For the first time that day, the courtroom no longer felt like a stage of lies. It felt like what it was meant to be, a place where justice could stand. The verdict did not end in that one room. It echoed outward, carried by voices, cameras, and headlines, until the entire city, and soon the entire nation felt its weight. By nightfall, the courthouse steps that had once been the scene of humiliation were filled with microphones and flashing lights. Reporters jostled for space, their voices urgent, their words tumbling over one another. The image of Officer Mercer's hand striking across Judge Lawson's face had already aired on evening broadcasts. The headlines scrolled across glowing screens. Federal judge assaulted by police officer, verdict shakes local department. The gallery's whispers had turned into the nation's conversation. News anchors spoke in measured tones, their voices carrying both shock and gravity. Tonight, federal authorities confirm they are launching a probe into not only the incident involving Judge Kendra Lawson, but into the wider record of Officer Grant Mercer and others in his unit. Sources indicate that dozens of past cases will be reopened. Clips rolled of citizens outside their homes, speaking into microphones with raw emotion. "I complained about him years ago. They said nothing could be done. My brother's case was dismissed. Maybe now someone will finally look." The nation began piecing together a puzzle that had long been ignored. Inside the department itself, the atmosphere shifted overnight. Hallways once filled with the easy confidence of untouchable officers now echoed with the low hum of unease. Budget lines were reviewed, oversight boards summoned, supervisors questioned. The mayor's office, forced into the spotlight, announced new reform measures: body camera audits every quarter, external review panels, and mandatory retraining. But the reforms were not described in numbers alone. Citizens saw them in smaller ways. The press conference, where officials stood stiff in front of flashing cameras, admitting failures they could no longer bury. The shuttered offices where complaint files were pulled from dusty cabinets and handed to federal investigators. The once casual roll calls where officers now spoke in hushed voices, uncertain of the ground beneath their feet. For Mercer, the probe spread like fire across everything he had touched. Each arrest he had made, each report he had filed, each complaint dismissed too quickly. All were reopened, reviewed line by line. Former defendants were contacted, their cases reconsidered. Court clerks stacked boxes of records taller than themselves, the paper trail finally given light. The gallery that had once whispered about Kendra's guilt now whispered something new. She didn't just save herself, she opened the door for everyone else. Civil rights attorneys stepped into the frame, their voices steady on the courthouse steps. This is not about one slap. It is about the culture of silence that allowed it. This probe is the beginning of accountability, not the end. In coffee shops and living rooms, ordinary citizens watched the footage play again and again. Some shook their heads in disbelief that it had ever been hidden. Others felt a quiet hope stir inside them. Fragile, but real. For Judge Lawson, the storm outside was not surprising. She had known that the moment she revealed herself in robes, the story would grow beyond her. She had not sought the cameras, yet they came. She had not asked to become a headline, yet she became one. In her chambers late at night, away from the microphones, she sat quietly with her clerks. They were young, their eyes wide at the scale of the events unfolding. She spoke to them in the same measured voice she had carried in the courtroom. "Justice is not loud," she told them. "It does not need volume to exist. But when silence breaks, justice must be steady enough to carry the weight." The clerks nodded, scribbling her words down like lessons they would carry into their own futures. Outside, the federal probe widened. Investigators interviewed witnesses whose voices had once been ignored. Old body camera files, thought to be deleted, surfaced from backups. The pattern Judge Lawson had shown in charts now stood undeniable in living stories. Budget lines shrank. Funding was cut from units that had failed oversight. Some called it punishment. Others called it correction. For the community, it felt like long-delayed balance. On the evening news, a reporter summed it up simply. The slap heard on the courthouse steps has become the spark of a federal fire, and its flames are reaching into every corner of the department. The gallery's whispers had become the nation's demand. Reform was no longer a word on paper. It was a reckoning carried out in real time. And though the road ahead would be long, something undeniable had begun. The silence that had once protected arrogance was gone. In its place stood scrutiny, oversight, and the steady gaze of truth. Morning broke heavy over the city the day after the verdict. Headlines still glowed from screens, but now the news carried new words: suspension, removal, apology. At the precinct where Mercer had once walked with arrogant stride, his locker was emptied in silence. The brass nameplate was unscrewed, dropped into a cardboard box with his badge and uniform folded flat on top. A supervisor stood nearby, his face tight, his voice clipped. "Officer Mercer, you are hereby removed from duty, effective immediately. Your credentials and access are revoked." Mercer's jaw trembled. He tried to hold his old bravado, but it slipped away as quickly as the badge leaving his chest. His fists clenched around the box, knuckles pale. He muttered under his breath, words no one cared to catch. His colleagues turned their faces away. For years he had carried the swagger of untouchability. Now, he walked out the side door alone. In another wing of the building, Caleb and Daniel sat before a disciplinary board. Their suspension letters lay on the table, printed on stiff paper. The language was formal, but its meaning was simple. They were stripped of their duties, pending further review. Caleb's hands shook as he signed the paper. Daniel lingered, his voice breaking as he whispered, "I never thought it would end like this." The chair of the board replied quietly but firmly, "It didn't have to end this way. You made choices. Now you live with them." By noon, the city attorney stood at a podium, cameras flashing, microphones bristling like a forest of silver stems. His face was pale, his voice rehearsed. "The city extends its deepest regret to Judge Lawson and to the community that trusted us to protect justice. We failed in that duty. We failed in oversight. Today, we begin to repair what has been broken." The apology rolled out across television screens and streaming feeds. Some citizens scoffed. Too little, too late. Others nodded solemnly, grateful at least to hear words that admitted fault. Behind the podium, banners from civil rights groups fluttered. Leaders stepped forward after the attorney, their voices steadier, their language sharper. This is not the end. This is the beginning of a movement. These suspensions are a first step, not a last. Crowds gathered in front of the courthouse, holding signs that read, "Justice is watching. Truth matters. No more silence." The mood was not chaos. It was not riot. It was solemn and powerful, a tide of voices rising with unity. Parents brought children, pointing to the courthouse steps and saying softly, "That's where it happened. That's where the truth was shown." Inside the courthouse, Judge Lawson worked quietly, far from the cameras. She signed rulings, met with clerks, and continued the rhythm of justice. But outside, her name had become a symbol. Reporters repeated it in reverent tones. Protesters painted it on posters. Commentators called her the judge who stood alone and made the system stand with her. For Caleb and Daniel, the fallout was personal in ways Mercer never considered. Caleb's family sat in their kitchen that night, his young daughter tugging at his sleeve, asking why people on the news looked so angry at him. He could not answer. Daniel sat in a quiet apartment, his phone buzzing with messages he did not have the courage to read. Mercer, however, remained defiant. Reporters caught him outside his lawyer's office, shouting about conspiracies, about being set up. But the sound bites were weak, drowned by the steady beat of official voices and the weight of evidence. His anger was no longer a storm. It was only noise fading into the air. Civil rights groups seized the momentum. They called meetings, filed petitions, and organized community forums. In one packed hall, a woman stood with tears in her eyes. For years, my complaint sat in a drawer. Now it matters. Now it's being read. That's what Judge Lawson gave us. Not just justice for herself, but justice for all of us. The applause that followed shook the room. By week's end, symbolic victories multiplied. The city council voted for new oversight funding. The department announced that complaint records would now be reviewed by independent panels. For the first time in years, citizens felt that their words would not vanish into silence. At the courthouse, a quiet moment stood in contrast. Judge Lawson walked the same steps where Mercer had struck her days earlier. The stone was cold underfoot, the morning sun throwing long shadows. Reporters were gone now, the crowd dispersed. Only the echo of memory remained. She paused, resting her hand lightly on the railing, and breathed deeply. The humiliation of that moment could never be erased, but neither could the dignity she had carried through it. And now, the very steps that had seen violence also bore witness to change. The gallery's whispers had once condemned her. Now, the city's voices rose to honor her, and in the fallout of 3 officers losing their power, an entire community gained back a piece of its trust. The courtroom lights dimmed, but the story did not. What had begun on courthouse steps now lived on television screens, in radio broadcasts, and across the endless scroll of headlines. The image of Judge Kendra Lawson, once bound in cuffs and now robed in authority, became a symbol people carried into their own conversations. Evening news anchors spoke with reverent tones. Judge Lawson stood against 3 armed officers and did not waver. Today, her courage is being hailed as a turning point in the fight for justice. On talk shows, commentators debated not whether she was right, but how deeply her actions would ripple. She stood alone, yet she stood for all of us, one guest said, his voice heavy with emotion. Newspapers ran her photograph across front pages, her robe, her gavel, her eyes steady under courtroom light. One headline read, "She didn't raise her voice, she raised the standard." The city that had once whispered fraud now whispered her name with respect. Letters began arriving at the courthouse, some scrawled in shaky handwriting, others typed neatly. Clerks stacked them in bins, carrying them to her chambers. She read as many as she could, her eyes lingering on certain lines. A woman wrote, "When I saw you sit in that chair, I saw myself finally heard." A young boy scribbled in pencil, "I want to be a judge like you when I grow up." An older man wrote in elegant cursive, "Your silence in humiliation was strength. Your words in truth were freedom." Not all the letters came from her city. Some arrived from across the country, even from other countries. Her story had traveled far, carried by the digital tide. Yet while the world painted her as a symbol, Kendra remained grounded in her own chamber. She kept her robe hung neatly on a stand, her gavel resting where sunlight touched it. She still arrived early, still reviewed cases late into the night, still reminded her clerks that justice was about steady work, not spotlight. One morning, as she entered the courthouse, she noticed a small group gathered at the steps. They weren't reporters, they were citizens, mothers, fathers, children, holding simple signs that read, "Thank you, Judge Lawson." She paused, surprised. A little girl stepped forward, clutching a folded piece of paper. She looked up with wide eyes and whispered, "This is for you." Kendra took it gently. It was a drawing of a woman in robes, standing tall, while 3 stick figures in uniform sat in small chairs below. At the bottom, the child had written in uneven letters, "Truth wins." Kendra smiled softly, her voice quiet. "Thank you. Never forget that truth isn't loud, it just lasts." The girl beamed, running back to her mother. Inside, reporters captured another moment. A community leader stood before cameras, saying, "We are not only celebrating a verdict, we are celebrating the reminder that integrity still exists in places of power. Judge Lawson gave us that." The gallery's whispers had once condemned her. Now they had become the city's applause. But even as praise filled the air, Kendra reminded those close to her that the symbol was not the point. Sitting with her clerks one afternoon, she spoke softly. "Do not mistake the robe for invincibility. It does not make me larger than life. It only gives me a duty. And duty, carried rightly, is what people see as courage." Her clerks nodded, humbled. The media, however, could not resist magnifying her image. Opinion pieces called her a beacon. Editorials claimed she was proof that silence can become strength. One national magazine named her Person of the Week. Her photo on the cover beneath bold letters, "The judge who would not bow." Citizens, meanwhile, wove her story into their daily talk. Barbershops, church steps, buses, all hummed with her name. Some repeated her quotes as though they were scripture. "Power without truth will always be judged." Others simply said, "She gave us hope." Still, amid the noise, Kendra carried herself as she always had, measured, quiet, dignified. She walked past cameras without pausing, choosing instead to greet a janitor by name, to ask a clerk about her child's health, to continue the ordinary rhythm of service. Because while the world needed a symbol, she knew the greater need was for steady hands to carry justice forward, case by case, person by person. The symbol had grown beyond her control, but the woman remained the same. The noise of the cameras had begun to fade. The crowds outside the courthouse no longer filled every step, and the microphones that once chased every word now pointed elsewhere. Yet the echo of the trial still lingered in the city's rhythm. In her chambers, Judge Kendra Lawson sat at a wide oak desk, sunlight spilling across stacks of files. Her robe hung quietly on the stand, no longer a costume for revelation, but once again a garment for daily duty. The weight of the trial remained in her memory, but her focus had shifted. There were new cases to read, motions to review, ordinary citizens still waiting for their voices to be heard. Her clerks, young, eager, and wide-eyed, moved around her with a kind of reverence. They had watched her endure humiliation in silence, then reclaim dignity with calm strength. To them, she was not only a judge, but a teacher of how to carry justice. One afternoon, as papers rustled and pens scratched, she set aside her file and looked up. Her voice was quiet, steady, yet it filled the room. "You have seen much these past weeks," she said. "You saw what happens when power forgets its duty. You saw what happens when silence is mistaken for weakness. And you saw what happens when truth is patient." The clerks leaned in, listening as if each word were a lesson they might never hear again. Kendra continued, her eyes soft but serious. The law is not a weapon. Do not ever treat it as such. It is a shield meant to protect the vulnerable, to steady the frightened, to remind even the powerful that they are not beyond reach. The words landed with gravity. One of the clerks scribbled them down immediately, the ink pressing deep into the page. Another nodded, her throat tight with emotion. Kendra smiled faintly. And remember this too. Justice is not about one robe or one gavel. It is not about me. This was never only about my dignity. It was about what dignity means for all. If a judge can be cuffed, insulted, and dismissed, then so can anyone. And if a judge can stand, so can anyone. The room was still. The clerks blinked, back tears, feeling the truth settle into their bones. Outside the courthouse, the tone of conversation had shifted as well. In neighborhoods that had once carried stories of complaints ignored, now people spoke of change. Churches rang bells for hope. Schools held assemblies, reminding children that standing firm in truth could change even the heaviest systems. Letters kept arriving, though fewer now. One was from a mother who had never stepped foot inside a courthouse. She wrote, "You reminded me that silence is not the end of the story. Thank you." Another came from a retired officer. "You showed us the badge is not broken, but the heart behind it must be true. I will carry that lesson in my last days of service." Kendra read each carefully, sometimes closing her eyes after finishing a line, letting the words soak in. Not praise, not flattery, but reminders of why her work mattered. She carried those reminders with her when she spoke to a group of law students weeks later. The lecture hall buzzed as she entered, students clutching notebooks, their eyes wide. She stood at the podium, but her tone was soft, as though speaking in a living room. "You have chosen the law," she told them. "That is no small choice. But remember, the law is not a ladder for climbing above others. It is a path for walking alongside them. If you ever raise it like a weapon, you will wound the very people you swore to serve. If you lift it as a shield, you will protect more than you imagine." The hall was quiet except for the scratching of pens and the faint hum of overhead lights. Her words hung like lanterns in the air, gentle but steady. When she finished, the students rose to their feet. Some clapped, but most simply stood, silent, as though honoring not just her words, but the calm strength behind them. Later, as she left the hall, one student ran after her, breathless. "Judge Lawson," he said, "do you think the law can ever really change?" Kendra paused, then smiled faintly. "The law itself is paper and ink. What changes is the people who carry it. And when people choose truth over silence, then yes, the law changes." The student nodded slowly, as though receiving more than an answer, as though receiving a charge to carry into the future. Back in her chambers, Kendra often returned to that quiet mantra. It was not about her name, her robe, or her trial. It was about the reminder that justice, carried rightly, was not loud. It was steady, like a shield. And she intended to keep carrying it. For herself, for her clerks, for the citizens whose trust had been scarred, but not destroyed. The healing was slow, but it had begun. The courthouse steps were quiet again. No microphones, no shouting crowds, no flashing cameras. Just stone warmed by sunlight, trees rustling softly in the breeze, and the faint echo of footsteps from people going about their day. It was hard to believe this was the same place where humiliation had once unfolded, where voices had once shouted accusations, and where truth had finally stood tall. Yet maybe that was the point. The place itself remained, but the meaning had changed. Inside, Judge Kendra Lawson continued her daily work. The trial that had shaken the city now lived in files, news archives, and in the stories people told each other at dinner tables. But for her, the rhythm of justice had returned to what it always was. Steady, deliberate, never glamorous, often quiet. And in that quiet, something healing had taken root. Citizens no longer whispered about her in suspicion. They spoke her name with respect, sometimes even reverence. But more importantly, they spoke to one another about dignity, fairness, and truth. They reminded each other of the lesson she had left in the air, that power without truth will always, eventually, be judged. The narrator's voice slows now, soft as twilight. It's easy to believe that dignity costs too much, that it's fragile, that it can be stolen in a single slap, a single insult, a single humiliation. But dignity is not fragile. It is not bought or sold, it is chosen, and when carried with patience, it endures. That is what Kendra showed them. For every gasp that had filled the gallery, for every accusation shouted, for every lie spoken in confidence, there was one robe, one gavel, one steady voice reminding them that silence can be strong and truth can be patient. The gallery's whispers, once poisoned, had become the city's lesson. And here, perhaps, is the gentle truth worth holding on to. In the end, dignity costs nothing, but it means everything. Out in neighborhoods, children now played a game they called the courtroom. One stood on a chair with a towel for a robe, holding a spoon as a gavel, while the others argued and pleaded. And every time, the judge declared, "Truth wins," and everyone laughed. It was play, yes, but it was also memory carried forward. In churches, preachers quoted her words. In classrooms, teachers told the story as a reminder of why honesty mattered. In homes, parents pointed to her photograph and told their children, "That's what strength looks like. Not fists, not shouting, but standing when everyone else doubts you." The story had left the courtroom long ago. It was now alive in living rooms and in quiet corners, reshaping how people thought about justice. The narrator smiles through the voice, speaking gently to the listener. And what about you? You've walked through this story tonight, through humiliation, through evidence, through verdict, through change. Perhaps you felt the sting of injustice in your chest. Perhaps you felt the relief of truth finally being named. Or perhaps you simply needed to be reminded that silence can be strong and dignity can outlast disgrace. Wherever you are listening from, whether you are in a busy city, a small town, or a quiet room at the end of a long day, remember this: no one is above the law, and no one is beneath its protection. If you believe dignity should never be optional, let this story travel further. Share it, tell it, carry it like a lantern into places where silence still lingers. The gavel has struck, the verdict has been spoken, but the lesson remains, soft and steady. Truth does not rush, but it does not fail. The outro slows further, warm and personal. I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. If this story gave you something to think about, you're welcome to subscribe and share it with someone who might need it. And as the light fades on this tale, remember, dignity costs nothing, but it means everything.